Okay, let's talk about the Great Fire of 1788. Now, everybody talks about the Great Fire of 1788 because it was such a key critical change, ground changing shift in New Orleans's history for so many reasons that we've been through this, numerous times and numerous references. But we want to focus on one thing in particular that I found that was an interesting statement or an interesting component of a primary source report from Governor Miro. And so we'll talk about that a little bit today. So the Great Fire of 1788, a New Orleans disaster. I am Edward Brandley, your NOLA history guy, NOLA history at NOLA history guy on all the social medias and all that kind of stuff. Come on in, ask questions, comments, you name it, and we'll talk about history all over the place. So let's talk. Here's our tour guide talking points for my colleagues who do my colleagues in general in the tour guide business, specifically my colleagues who do the Friends of the Cabildo French Quarter walking tours. The fire took place on March 21st, 1788, which was Good Friday. Good Friday, of course, the crucifixion of Christ, the most solemn day of the Catholic liturgical calendar. The point of origin was at 621 Charter Street. So when I'm giving my tour, I come down, come up Wilkinson Street. You get to Wilkinson and Charters, and you look right up, and boom, you're there. You're at 621 Charters. The wooden house that was there at the time was owned by a Spanish army officer, Don Vicente Jose Nunez. Approximately 800, I've seen, I think specific numbers, 856 of 1,100 buildings in the French Quarter, in New Orleans, because there was no other part of the city at that point, were destroyed. Public buildings included the Garde du Corps building, the rectory, and in between the two, the parish church, the Church of St. Louis, King of France, which at the time was just your basic parish church. The rebuild, of course, was done under the Spanish government, 1788. The Spanish negotiated the treaty in 1762, so we date being part of New Spain from there, but practically from 1768. So we're 20 years into Spanish government in New Orleans at the time of the fire. That is important because that changes the architecture of the quarter indelibly, with the Spanish requiring everything be built from brick, everything being built out to the curb with no front lawns, and just then the general architectural design and styles of a lot more Spanish colonial and Caribbean influence and that kind of thing. Miro's report from the time misstates the origin point of the fire, and that's kind of sort of the point of the pod today is to look at that particular, and I'll tell the story of why that caught my eye, and then of course the second fire in 1798 hinders rebuilding. It's like, well, we don't have a church, so we're going to start building another church, and then fire kicks up in 1794 and puts a stop to just about everything since the progress was came to an abrupt halt. So that's why so many things in the quarter only date to 1795 as well. Okay, here is a map of the quarter from 1734. So this is a plan of the French Quarter. Now remember, Dupaget designs his initial grid in 1721. So this is 13 years later, and you can see things are fleshing out a little bit. And of course, again, we're on the walking tour, and you walk out of the gift shop, and you walk into Jackson Square, and you say we're in the Place d'Armes, and you gotta visualize, instead of this lovely park, this just sandy, dirty block square uh, area for the parade ground. But of course, the first thing there was in Depage's plan was to put the church, and you can see it right there, that little cross-shaped building right above the Place d'Armes. So that was the first church, the Church of St. Louis, and the buildings on either side, the Garde du Corps and the jail, and then the rectory on the other, on the St. Anne's side. No Pontalbas yet, no nothing. This is all just wood, French, uh, colonial French, Canadian, uh, very not organized type architecture and design coming from this. Zoom in a little bit here so you can see there's the church on the right, and if we go over to the left, we see Saint Pierre Street right there, St. Peter Street. So you see, we see the church, the Garde du Corps, St. Peter Street. Then we move into the block, we move into the block of charters there between St. Peter and Toulouse. And you can see toward the middle of the block there, there's two little buildings in a lot there, right, in between the words rue and day in on the street. That one block that one lot that's in between, that's Nunez. Well, I'm going to assume that that's Nunez's house because that's obviously still 50 years away. It could be a different building by that point, but I don't have a decent plan of the area for specifically for 1788. That cross that's on the plan, of course, that is the Church of St. Louis. The plans were drawn up by Depage when he was laying everything out in 1721. He puts the plans for the church. Those plans get fleshed out and built in 1728. It stands on what is now the present site of the Cathedral Basilica of St. Louis, what we affectionately always just call St. Louis Cathedral, which is the third church on that site because this first church burned down in 1788. The second church was rebuilt as a cathedral, is a much larger church, but that burns down in 1850, and the present cathedral dates to 1850. So you can see there's that cross shape that you see on that 1722, 1734 map of the city, and basically it's just a wood frame parish church. Here's the map that is initially part of Miro's report back to to Madrid, to the crown after the fire, illustrating the primary area that was burned down. So the 800 some odd buildings were burned down in that area from the levee, from the river. You can see Plaza de Armas, that's the Spanish Place d'Armes, and you can see the Garde du Corps building. Basically, everything gets engulfed there. So the point of origin there, if you see where it says Plaza de Armas and you see the church, you go one square over, it's engulfed by the flames. That's the point of origin of the fire. So it starts in that point of origin in the Nunez home in their chapel. So you kind of get the idea here. It appears that Nunez was working at home that day. He sends the family off to the church so that they can go and, Good Friday devotions for Good Friday observance for devout Spanish Catholics. The family plus a good bit of the colony were spending a lot of time, of course, in the church that day. Nunez, being a senior member of government, obviously had some things to do. He did his devotions and said his prayers in the house, the private chapel inside the house. Now, the way I kind of envision this, of course, is you've got a chapel. It's a solemn day. So he's lit all the candles and he's praying at the altar in the house. It's March. It's already likely getting a bit warm, or at the very least, he's got those candles burning in the house. So he opens up the window. Maybe he steps out for a minute to go do something in his office or in another room in the house. The wind comes in from the open window. There were likely curtains or at least some kind of draper covering over the window that blows into the house from a gust of wind. It blows over the altar on the candles. The candles set off the drapes. Everything is there is wood, and then it's basically the equivalent of lighting one match and then turning that lit match onto the rest of a pack of matches, and poof, you know how the whole thing goes up. The wooden structures burn quick. Everything else around it are those matches, basically wooden matches that just go up like tinder, and 800 buildings within a matter of hours. Everybody pretty much evacuates out. The fire spreads because it's going from the river, basically the wind is coming from the south. So you can see it's coming up in this picture. So the wind is coming across the river, and it's blowing north there. It's blowing towards the lake. So that gives everybody a chance to run out onto the levee, get down to the riverbank, and that's basically the wind is sheltering at that point. It's not spreading into the riverbank at that point. Esteban Rodriguez Miro. Uh, Miro is the sixth Spanish governor of Louisiana. He takes over from Bernardo de Galvez in 1785. Galvez was quite the big deal, and was, to this day is honored and respected as leading, or providing a great deal of assistance to the United States during the American Revolution. Miro was right with him as his second in command. Uh, Galvez gets appointed and takes over the Spanish government in Mexico City. So that's a big move for him. And Miro moves up. Now, Miro is fairly well established in New Orleans. He's been, obviously, he's there during Galvez's administration. He marries a New Orleanian. That's actually a woman of Irish extraction who is part of a planter family. So he's got ties here and everything else. It's logical for him to take over. He takes over in 1785. 3 years later, he's engulfed in, literally in that sense, in the fire, and he's got to deal with, obviously rescue, recovery, getting people immediate shelter, and then rebuilding the city. So he supervises the rebuilding. Of course, the Spanish rebuild the city in the only way they know, and that's with Spanish building codes, Spanish colonial either design. You have French architects as well that are offering their opinions, but in terms of the actual building codes, it's no more of this wood frame stuff. You're building with brick, you're building out to the sidewalk, you're doing the things we do in Havana and Pensacola and other all throughout Central and South America, following Spanish directions. This is where it gets interesting because we have a very solid primary source for a history of the fire, and that is Miro's report after the fire to Madrid. And here's a section of it. This is a quote now from the report. If the imagination could describe what our senses enable us to feel from sight and touch, reason itself would recoil in horror, and it is no easy matter to say whether the sight of an entire city in flames was more horrible to behold than the suffering and pitiable condition in which everyone was involved. Yeah, because it's like the place is burning, and it's like the people are in complete distress. They're pretty much losing everything they have as the fire burns. Mothers in search of a sanctuary or refuge for their little ones, and abandoning their earthly goods to the greed of the relentless enemy, the flames, would retire to out of the way places rather than be witness of their utter ruin. They were going into the warehouses on the edge of the city or into the woods. Fathers and husbands were busy in saving whatever objects the rapidly spreading flames would permit them to bear off, while the general bewilderment was such as to prevent them from finding even for these a place of security. Yeah, there was so much loss in terms of loss of not just the property, the buildings and the houses, but the personal property lost here was an incredible disaster. Now, this is the report of Governor Esteban Rodriguez Miro, translated by Henry C. Castellanos. The Great Fire, Castellanos publishes it, of course, as the Great New Orleans Fire of 1788. Castellanos publishes this in 1938, 1939. He goes to Madrid and he finds, because of course they mailed this report off, he finds this in Spanish in Madrid, digs up this research, brings back the original, comes back to New Orleans, translates this, and the Times-Picayune in 1938 makes a big deal out of this report, because this is the first time it's been published it's the first time it's been published ever, really, dug up out of the government archives in Spain. So you kind of get the idea here. This is not only a big deal for a primary source of the report, but as well somebody who's willing to take the time to translate it, and then the Picayune just runs with it from there as a solid academic find. Here's the part that threw me when I was reading this. Now I'm, looking in. As you guys know, and we'll talk about it in a minute, I'm a big fan of Louisiana Anthology and all the work that Stephen and Bruce do. So I found the report on their site, and I'm reading through this. And here's the part that stumped me. On the evening of the 21st of March, 1788, at 1:30 o'clock, a fire broke out in the private residence of Don Vicente Jose Nunez, paymaster of the army. Then in parentheses, this building was situated at the lower corner of Charters and Toulouse streets on the woods side. The woods side meaning the side towards Canal Street, because in 1788 there was really no American sector at this time. The whole thing kind of ends at Custom House Street, and there really isn't even a Canal Street at this point, even though it's on Dupage's plan that there's going to be, that's going to be the far side of the city at that point. So here's the thing. All through all of this with the map and everybody, we always, we say we think we know the location of the fire at 721. All through the French Quarter walking tour guide training class, all the resources point at this, and I'm stumped now. I'm looking at this, I'm reading the Castellanos translation, and I'm like, this doesn't work. What also threw me, and we'll get there in a minute. We look at that corner at Charters and Toulouse, and the whole thing just threw me. Right, I'm like, this doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So let's look at Charters and Toulouse. Now, this is a grid map a little bit earlier, 1722. So this is right after Dupage designs the grid, lays out the streets, and we start seeing the streets become fleshed out and become reality. So you can see here, this is Toulouse. This is the block after the fire, the point of origin that we know, and Toulouse, and the block Toulouse to St. Peter, and then St. Peter into the Place d'Armes and the church would be off frame to the right here. But Toulouse and Charters, and you go up to that corner, and there's that shaded in box there, rectangle. That would be the building that Miro's report says is the origin of the fire. And that's throwing me something fierce, right? Because this is like that doesn't jive with anything. And the folks that prepare all the educational resources for the tour guide training are kind of like, yeah, they're pretty good at this, right? So I'm like, well, wait a minute, what did I miss here? That kind of thing. So I kind of wrote that piece up, took that quote, took a couple of other references, threw them out on Facebook. Specifically for a private group for the tour guides. And the big thing that threw me where I dug back and was rereading Castellanos and everything was this photo here. It's of the Galley House, which is at the corner of Toulouse and Charters on the woods side. So this is a 1939 photo of a Creole townhouse that becomes known as the Galley House, and it caught my eye because I love old bar signs and that kind of thing, and taverns and pubs, and they all, the bar rooms always tell a story, right? That kind of thing. So I was digging into this, and this will be an unpack at some point because there is an interesting story here. But what really was the big deal was that the record in for this particular photo in the Louisiana Digital Library, specifically the it says this is from 1939, and it puts there site of the origin of the 1788 fire. Now, if the photo is from 1939, that would be a logical reference because Castellanos' report is recently out. Miro says this is where the fire begins. That's where it all gets kind of odd because I throw this back out to my more experienced guide colleagues who had, done a lot more work on this. And they were like, no, go look at the property records. Go look at the Vieux Carré survey from the Historic New Orleans collection, which is a property database for the French Quarter. And you go look at the big thing is you go back and look at 721 Charters, and you see Nunez's title change history that he buys that house, lives in it, sells it off, rebuilds it, and basically it's sold off out of the Nunez family as he is reassigned. And it's like, no, there's no reference to the property at Charters in Toulouse being owned by Nunez. So the speculation that is believed here is that the building at Charters in Toulouse was most likely Nunez's office, that he didn't always work from home. Obviously, he had an office where, it's military, right? It's the Spanish Army garrison people. So he has an office in that first building on this location. And that's the confusion, is because I guess that somebody writing that report for the governor thought maybe this was, at his, they say residence in the report. Maybe they thought that was his residence because he spent a lot of time there, where the speculation is perhaps this location was his office. And so there was, he was in both places a good bit. And so that's the source of confusion. Like I said, we're going to unpack this because I just love the idea. I got to look more into Jake's Place and Steino root beer and all of that kind of stuff. Again, shout out to the Louisiana Anthology and happy 7th anniversary to the anthology. Stephen Payne and Bruce McGee have done such a wonderful project here of compiling everything and everything literary about New Orleans, not about New Orleans, but about Louisiana. It's like you say anthology to a lot of people, and the first thing they think of is high school. The Norton Anthology of English Literature, that kind of thing, those big survey books that you had in school and everything. And that's kind of their model, but it's a digital format, right? It's an online, and so much easier. It's so much easier to manage, research, and work with than trying to just search engine things or go to archive.org and that kind of stuff. The guys have put in just an incredible amount of effort into it. Louisiana-anthology.org. If you're looking up stuff, you're looking for documentation, you're looking for literature, and then, of course, if you want years of the podcast of interviewing authors and historians and other notable people from Louisiana, the Louisiana Anthology podcast is just an incredible resource as well. Seriously, you want and need to check these guys out. A word from your sponsor, as we've talked about in the last couple of weeks. We've expanded the Patreon site for NOLA History Guy. You see it down there at the bottom, patreon.com/NOLA History Guy. We've always had a $1 membership level or supporters level on Patreon that gave some basic benefits. We've expanded that now to a $5 tier as well, that you now get a second podcast each week, plus other blog posts and other content on NOLA History Guy. That's patron only or supporters only at the $1 and now new at the $5 level. I was being facetious in the last couple of weeks, but I'm only half joking when I say I have seen what you guys pay $5 a month for on Substack. I know I'm not out of line here, so please, if you've got that, yeah, if you're able to support us, become a patron, become a $5 tier supporter, and you'll get a whole bunch of neat stuff with some, we're going back to the old school podcast unpacks and that kind of thing. How this works: sign up at go to patreon.com, NOLA History Guy. Sign up at either the $1 or the $5 level. You get a 7-day free trial at the level you choose, and you can always upgrade later to get the full content at the $5 level. Our regular word from your sponsor: buy my books, please. These are the first five, the four images of America books, plus Legendary Locals of New Orleans, which is just basically a who's who of people over the 300 plus years of the 300 plus years of the life of the city. And then, of course, my book for the History Press. When I did the Maison Blanche book, the History Press contacted me and says, "Hey, we like what you did with that department store. How would you like to do another one?" And I was like, "Heck yes!" So another really even deeper dive into a Jewish retail family, the history of Canal Street retailing, and the history of Jewish retail on Canal Street. Plus a good bit on Storyville, because Storyville's right there next to, or the Storyville district was right there, out of frame on the left of the photo in the cover of the book, right? So yeah, so Krauss, the New Orleans value store from the History Press. Again, I am Ed Branley, your NOLA History Guy. The site is nolahistoryguy.com. I hesitate to say ask me anything because it's not a Reddit AMA, but ask me anything about New Orleans history and we'll see if we can get an answer for you. Feel free at NOLA History Guy on all the social medias. And shout out, as always, to the folks who did this parchment style PowerPoint template. It's in the Creative Commons, and we love to recognize these people. If you like this and want to use it, like I say, it's in the Commons. Just ping me. I'll send you the template, or you can just go ahead and Google these folks, and you'll be able to find it back online.